Hello dear friends, I'm Samuel Moore and welcome to my Study with Samuel video series. So today I'd like to talk about chords, chord voicings and the functionality of chords in a flamenco context. Crucially, I want to do this in a way that is accessible. In other words, I'm not going to hit you with a wall of music theory. We're just going to give you a few basic pointers here so that you can access flamenco language a little bit easier. So let's start with the absolute basics. What is a chord? Well, in its most basic form, a chord is two or more notes, usually three or more, played together. So, for example, if you wanted to play an A major chord, there are three notes for the most part in that chord. A, the root, C sharp, the major third, and E, the perfect fifth. Now, I can hear you saying straight away, well, hang on a minute, when I play an A major chord, I play that, and I'm strumming 5 strings, so what do you mean there are 3 notes? Well, let's just analyse what the notes are individually. That's an A, that's an E, that's another A, that's a C sharp, that's an E. You see what I mean? You might be strumming 5 strings, but it's still 3 notes. A, C sharp, E. Now, this is the clever bit. Any combination of notes can be played in many different ways on the fretboard. And doing so will give you different voicings of the same chord. So, for example, that voicing there, I don't just have to play A like that. I could play A like this, in 5th position. And although it looks different in terms of the shape, although it sounds slightly different, and although I'm now strumming 6 strings rather than 5, ultimately it's the same chord because it's the same notes. A, C sharp, E. A, E, another A, C sharp, another E, and another A. You see what I mean? It's the same chord, just in different locations. So far, so good. So now let's take a moment to talk about the function of chords. Don't be panicked if you hear a fancy sounding phrase like the functionality of chords. It really simply means this. In any given key, or in any given chord progression, each chord has a distinct function. So, for example, let's say I'm playing in the por medio key in flamenco. The bass line that kind of underpins that key is D, C, B flat, and A. In other words, the Andalusian cadence in the key of A. And were you to harmonise that, in other words, again, that's a fancy way of saying put chords to it, the chords that underpin the key are D minor, C, B flat, and A. And each one of those chords within the context of that chord progression and that key has a function. In other words, each chord has a job. So, for example, the A major chord, the function or the job of that chord is essentially to be home. In other words, it's your point of resolution. It sounds like you've arrived home when you land on it. So, to contrast that, let's now talk about the B flat chord. What's the function of the B flat chord? Well, essentially, the job of that is to resolve you, in other words, move you back to the A chord. So in other words, to create tension that's then resolved. So tension, resolution. Away from home, back home. So you see my point. Within certain contexts, chords have specific functions. Now, so far this has been relatively straightforward. This is the complex bit. In flamenco, the function of a chord is more important than what the chord technically is. Let me give you an example. So let's say you're having a lesson. The tutor might say, okay, we're playing por medio. So let's just move between the B flat and the A chord. And you're thinking, great, I know what that is. But the tutor might do something like this. Or this. And you'll quite rightly be thinking, well, hang on a minute, what's going on there? You said B flat to A. Well, this is the thing. This chord, for instance, technically speaking, that's a G minor 6 chord. But in the context it's being used, it's functioning as a B flat. And the job of the B flat is to move you back to A. Similarly, this chord, this has a very expensive name. Technically speaking, that's a B flat major 9 with a sharp 11 / F. Okay, it's quite a long sounding name, okay? But in many respects you don't need to know that. In the context of this chord progression, it's functioning as a B flat. And that's the important piece of information you need to know. So, armed with this knowledge, we can do something quite interesting. For each one of these chords, we can look at different ways to play them. And by understanding what the function of each chord is, you can then use these when you perform. Before we continue with today's lesson, I'd like to do a quick shout out to let you know about my new Patreon account. For those of you who've never come across Patreon before, Patreon is a unique crowdfunding platform that allows artists like myself to offer exclusive content in exchange for monthly pledges. Your generosity allows me to continue working as a full-time musician, and in exchange you get access to some really great material, from unseen tutorial videos similar to this one, to flamenco guitar lessons. You even get access to my weekly gathering, the Midweek Guitar Meet. This weekly study group takes place on Wednesday evenings and is a great opportunity to connect with a global community of like-minded musicians who share your passion, at the same time as getting targeted feedback from myself on a regular basis. So if all this sounds interesting to you, please click the link in the description below to access my Patreon page and select an option that works for you. I look forward to meeting you, connecting with you, and together continuing our musical journey. Now, however, let's get back to today's lesson. So let's just start with the D minor. So the D minor chord, you could play it like this, just as a straight D minor. But let's say you want a slightly different colour. You could take this finger away so you've got the open E in there, thus giving it a very different colour. Now, from a music theory perspective, technically that's a D minor 9 chord, but it's functioning as a D. So flamenco musicians may just refer to it as D, D minor. Similarly, you might see flamenco musicians say something like, D minor. Now, technically speaking, that chord voicing there, that's not really a D minor in many respects. It's a B flat chord with a D in the bass. So it's a B flat chord with a D in the bass. So B flat / D. But in the context of this chord progression, it's functioning as D minor. Similarly, you could play, D minor in 5th position, like so. Or you could take the pinky away from that bar chord to make it a minor 7th. Or you could even play it as a standard bar chord, but without the bar. So you've got the open E on top. So it's a minor 9. So you see what I'm getting at? All of these chords they all sound very different, but in the context of this chord progression, they're all functioning as D minor. Let's move to the next chord. So C. You can play it like that, but often in flamenco you'll see it voiced like this. Now technically that's a C9 chord, okay? And in the context of kind of Western theory and harmony, a C9 chord would normally take you to F. But that doesn't matter. In a flamenco context, it's functioning as though it were a C chord, which is why you often see chord cycles like this. The C9 is functioning as a C. Similarly, you could play C in third position as a bar chord, or you could voice it like so, as a major 7 chord. Again, all of these chords sound different. But they're functioning as a C in the context of that chord progression. Let's have a look at B flat. So we covered a few before, but let's just go over it again. So the B flat chord, you can play it as a straight bar chord in first position. Or you could take away the bar, so you've got the open E on top. Now, technically that's a B flat sharp 11, but again, you don't really need to know that. Its job is to function as a B flat. Similarly, you could play it without this finger in there. It's a B flat sharp 11, but ultimately it's functioning as B flat. We then got the ones we looked at earlier. So if you put this finger up here on the G, technically that's a G minor 6 chord, but in the context of this, it's functioning as B flat, and the job of B flat's to take you back to A. Similarly, the very expensive sounding one we had earlier. Okay? As I said, that's a B flat major 9 sharp 11 slash F. But you don't really need to know that. All you need to know, it's functioning as a B flat, and the B flat's job is to take you to A. And finally, we get to the A chord. So again, this is your home chord. You can play it like so, as normal. But if you want to make it sound a little bit more flamenco, you can put the flat 9, which is a fancy way of saying putting the B flat in the chord. And it gives you that. On a similar level, you could basically use this finger to put the G in the bass, making it an A slash G. But to all intents and purposes, that is functioning as your tonic chord. Similarly, you could have the G in the bass, and you could use the pinky to play the B flat as well. So it's an A flat 9 slash G. It's a lovely chord. But again, it's functioning as A. You could even go to fifth position and have the bar chord we looked at right at the start of this video. But again, it's just functioning as a standard A. And similarly, you could bring the pinky out to here, which is another voicing of an A flat 9 chord. So you get what I'm saying. If you understand that the function of the chord is more important than what the chord technically is, it's very easy to add lots of variety to your flamenco playing very, very quickly. You don't have to play it like that every time. You could have C minor 9. I'm sorry, D minor 9. C9. Then G minor 6. And then A with the flat 9 in. You see what I mean? By knowing these voicings, you can really open up the instrument. So when you're playing cigarilla, for instance, or a palo in this key, you don't always have to go. You could choose to go So understanding this opens up the instrument to you in a much greater way. You don't have to know tons of music theory. You just have to understand what the function of the chords are in the context that they're being used. As I said, in flamenco, the function of a chord is often a lot more important than what the chord technically is. I leave that in your capable hands. Well, my friends, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. But if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. There'll be more videos coming soon. If you want to study with me on a more one-to-one basis, you can book Skype and Zoom lessons via my website. A link is in the description below. Until we next see each other, you stay safe, and as always, thank you for watching.